Welcome everybody. My name is Bryn Durgan. I'm the Director of Programming here at Bookstore One. And you're up here, you guys know, we do so much programming. We do author talks, book signings, writing workshops, poetry open mics, you name it. So if you're not already on our mailing list, you can sign up for that downstairs while you're picking up some books from today. Okay, so before we go any further, I'll just tell you a little bit of what to expect. So our two authors will be in conversation, and then we'll segue into a question and answer with all of you, and then we'll segue into the book signing downstairs. Okay, let me introduce you to our moderator. A Florida native, she is the author of 2 new poetry collections, Field Notes from the Flood Zone and The Present State of the Garden, as well as earlier collections, The Boys I Borrow and Drinking Girls and Their Dresses. Her most recent book, How to Make Poems, continues her long engagement with the art and craft of writing. Her textbook, The Practice of Creative Writing, is now in its 4th edition, following her other craft books, Page After Page and Chapter After Chapter, which we have for sale downstairs. She has also written a children's book, Spike and Cubby's Ice Cream Island Adventure with Amy Young, numerous chapbooks, a collection of linked short stories called Georgia Underwater, and the memoir, You Don't Look Like Anyone I Know. Her essays have appeared in the New York Times, Reader's Digest, Real Simple, Good Housekeeping, The Sun, the Oprah magazine. And her essay, Haywire, was selected for the Best American Essays by Leslie Jameson, and Pedal, Pedal, Pedal received a Pushcart Prize. She regularly speaks about prosopagnosia, however you say, it's a hard word to say, face blindness, most recently at NASA. So let's welcome the wonderful Heather Sellers. And now, for the author of the hour, she has had a long career writing and teaching fiction. Her short stories have been published in Plowshares, The Sun, and Epiphany, and her story, Boyfriends, was awarded a Pushcart Prize. She is also the assistant director of the Writers Studio in New York City. A Gorgeous Excitement, her first novel, was inspired by her upbringing on New York's Upper East Side in the 1980s, and particularly by the notorious Preppy murder of 1986. The novel was named a Best Book of 2025 by The New Yorker, Kirkus Reviews, and Oprah Daily. She now lives in New York's Hudson Valley. So join me in welcoming the brilliant Cynthia Weiner.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you for having us. It's always a treat to be in Bookstore One. Let's just jump right into it. Cynthia, this book is ripped from the headlines and also from your own life. What are the origins of the book, and when did you start writing it?
Thank you, Heather, and thank you so much for hosting us here at Bookstore One. It's a beautiful, beautiful store. So back in 1986, just to go back a little bit, during that summer, there was a terrible and very notorious strangling in Central Park that occurred where a girl was murdered by a guy, it turned out, that I knew a little bit, and was a friend of mine and hung out at a bar that I hung out at. He'd been at my parents' house, I had spent some time with him, and it was very shocking, obviously, and stayed with me my whole entire life. I can talk more about that too, but I tried to write about this for many years. I tried to write it. I was primarily a short story writer, and I tried to write it as a short story from, various points of view, and from, the actual story unfolding extemporaneously, and then I tried it from years later, looking back. In other words, I tried it in a million different ways, and it just was not, a short story couldn't contain the whole entire story. But I still don't really know how to write it. And I think it was around the time that sexual assault was sort of back in the news, and misogyny, and I mean, it's always there, but was coming to the forefront again politically. I thought back again to that summer, and I remembered that a member of my family who was bipolar, had a manic episode that summer. I mean, I knew it, but it just sort of came to the surface. And remembering that kind of gave me the structure of how to tell the rip from the headline story, if that makes sense. because I realized that the euphoria of that summer, there was a lot of drugs that summer, and there was the euphoria of liking a guy, and there was the euphoria of a mother becoming manic, and just the city at that time, and the 80s, and Wall Street, and the money, it all kind of came together. And now I forgot your question, but I think that was the question. Sorry.
So you've been writing it, I mean.
I've been writing it forever, and
Yeah.
yes.
So the crime took place
Yes.
in New York City in 1986, and
Yes.
that's when the novel is set. What was the city, you were there, what was the city like then?
Yes, so the city was very colorful. It was the time of Madonna and very poppy, fun music, and everyone was dressed in very bright colors. And at the same time, there was tons of money, and it was Wall Street, and it was cocaine, and at the same time, the city was still very dangerous. So there was that kind of grittiness also, and the subway was, full of graffiti and dirt and homeless people, and you did not go to Central Park, which was one of the great sort of shocks of this case, was that it had taken place in Central, the strangling took place in Central Park, but it was very dangerous. As a young woman at the city at the time, anywhere you went, there was, groups of men catcalling on the street. I guess they don't really do that anymore.
We do in Florida.
You do it maybe they just don't do it for me anymore. But it just was everyone talked. There were no cell phones, and parents didn't know where their kids were, and no one had GPS, and nobody had. Everyone just would say meet at this bar, meet at this place. It just felt a little more haphazard and dangerous and spontaneous and all of those things at once. Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about your writing process, because I know we have writers in the audience, but first I want to ask, you knew this guy.
Yes.
How did you feel when you first heard about the murder? What was that like for you? It could have been you.
Yes. Part of what I tried to show in the book was this guy was extraordinarily handsome, and that's not the most important thing about him, but it was I was just talking to someone the other day who knew him, and she said, it's hard for people to understand how good looking he was. And so he was known to everybody. This wasn't just like a random guy. Everybody knew him. He was like famous in Manhattan, in Upper East Side, as girls would follow him on the street. Girls would wait for him on the stoop. He was one of these guys that was just everybody. Now, and at the same time, he was very troubled, which we didn't quite realize how troubled, but he'd been kicked out of every school. He was known to steal money from girls' pocketbooks at parties. But my feeling when this happened, and a lot of people's feeling initially, was he said it was an accident. That was what he literally said, that she had been sitting on him and hurt him, and he flipped her over, and that was how she got hurt. And I believed him. I think a lot of girls believed him. A lot of people believed him. They said there's no way this guy, who could have any girl he wanted and was so well known and was such a big deal, could do this crazy thing. He'd never done anything like it before. So then it came out a lot more of his troubles. He made a video that was just really gross that happened to get onto, oh my gosh, I can't remember the name of the show, Dateline or something, where he twisted off the head of a doll. It was just, and some more things came out. It came out that he was robbing girls' houses and apartments. And then it was like, oh gosh. And there was a lot of denial too, about, this would never happen to me. I would never go to the park in the middle of the night. But you know what? I would have gone to the park in the middle of the night if he had asked me. So then the reality kind of started seeping in a little bit more. And as I got older, I felt more the vulnerability of it, and the feeling of like, yeah, of course that could have been me. Of course. Now as I've gotten older, I've seen in real life and in movies and TV and in the news, people suddenly turn. People you thought were fine and nice, and he had been really nice to me, well, no, that's not true. There was one time where he wasn't so nice to me, where I threw out a little joint out the window that he yelled at me because I threw it out, and was like, why'd you do that? You're wasting it. And he kind of grabbed my arm, and so, but that seemed like what people were like then. I don't know. So it was as I got older, I think, and as I I now have 4 nieces. So as I had the experience of being around more young women, and I was a college professor for 18-year-olds for a long time, for young women and men too. And I think as I got older, I came to understand how scary it was. More than I did initially, I would say. I think initially it was, she was an outsider, he was an insider, whatever he said was true. You know?
When you say she's an outsider, you know that I've always thought of this book as a Jewish story. The victim was Jewish and othered in some significant ways. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to that theme in the project?
Yeah. One of the things that he said in real life, Robert Chambers, after he killed the girl, was she was pushy. She was too pushy. That was the word he used, which had a lot of resonance for me as a young woman who was trying to learn how to be a young woman at that time. You know what I mean? Like how to show boys I liked them without overdoing it, all that kind of thing. And it also had Jewish connotations. And I grew up Jewish in New York City in a very waspy world in the 1980s. And I felt very much like an outsider. At the high school I went to, the grade school and high school I went to, there was like 3 Jewish girls in my class. We said, prayers, Christian prayers, Lord's Prayer every morning. We said Bible verses. I mean, it wasn't a religious school. It was just the way New York was at that time. Jewish people, the World War II and the Holocaust had kind of just happened. And Jewish people were still seen as sort of strivers and outsiders. And I really felt that. I didn't like my name. I didn't like how I looked. Everyone was blonde and really skinny and tall and, was sort of tan, and everybody had country houses, all those kind of things that when I was a teenager made me feel very apart. And there was also a lot of anti-Semitism at the time. Just very casually, people referred to Japs, and people talked about, Jap tan. I think I used that in the book, where if you got tan on the front but not on the back, that was considered a Jap tan, like because you were laying out. It wasn't part of being sporty and that kind of blonde girl who rode horses and did gymnastics. Like it wasn't, or sailed. It wasn't that. It was like you just laid there. It was just that connotation that sort of Jewish girls were spoiled and they were just outside. And so when he used that word, and in real life, the girl he murdered was Jewish, and she was from Long Island. She was kind of a quote unquote outsider. I know that, if that makes sense. It's so silly, but it's very sort of New York. Who's in and who's out, and who's part of things and who's not. And so that was when it was a Jewish girl he killed. It just felt, and when he used that word, it felt, and when people characterized her that way in the newspaper and in magazines as pushy and aggressive and spoiled, those were real Jewish connotations. So that wasn't a big part of writing the book, yeah.
It's so powerful, Cynthia, and so chilling. In the book, you wrestle with Nina, the main character's struggle to come to terms with, I don't want to give too much away, but she really is in denial about the very things you're talking about. And the media is so complicit in the way she's internalized this story. Do you want to talk a little bit about the actual media representation and how you use that in the book?
I would love to, thank you. I wish I had brought the cover of the magazine, but anyone can look it up. There was a New York magazine that came out, I think 2 months later. This is just an example. There was, I've got to find that picture. There was a picture of him in like a blue blazer, and if I remember, a red tie. Very handsome, on the cover of New York magazine, and there's a little teeny weeny picture of her in the corner, as if she were just nothing, and he was the one who was the important one of this story and was the star. I'm trying to remember some of the headlines. Rough sex was one of the words, the phrases that was used, that she, again, that she had been so aggressive and that she had been, what was it? She courted death. Jenny courted death was one of the headlines, as if she was so wild. I mean, they did a whole big thing about her, like quote unquote sex diary, which was really a date book. It was not a sex diary. I mean, none of this was true. I mean, they gave all of these things. She'd like slept with Billy Idol. None of that was true, and that was all in the newspaper because his lawyer also characterized her that way. But it wasn't just his lawyer. Again, it was sort of seen as he was the insider. He had gone to all of these preppy schools. He'd gone to all of these nice schools, and he didn't really have money, but he seemed to have money, and he'd grown up in a nice part of Manhattan. And again, she came from a divorced family, and she was an outsider, and she had only moved to the city the year before. And I think there was also, this was the 80s in New York when women were working more and starting to become a big part of the workforce. And I think there was a real misogyny and fear of women taking over. And so they really, there were all these covers of the newspapers talking about how she had pursued him and all this stuff. That I think it was part of that too. And at the time, they don't really have them anymore, but newsstands, there would just be the covers of the newspaper everywhere with these huge words saying this on it, and kiosks all over. And there was 7 channels, TV channels at the time, and all of them were about this with the same story about her. Same narrative about her. And it really wasn't until at least a year later when he went to trial that other things came out that, it was the truth of him came out. But yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about your writing process for the writers in the audience. How do you write a novel, Cynthia?
Well, Heather, who helped me so much writing this novel, I want to say that for anyone who doesn't know Heather's books, page by page and chapter by chapter, which is here, I discovered these books about midway through writing my novel, where I was getting a little stuck. I had moved out of the city, it was COVID, and I think I was getting a little bit overwhelmed. And Heather, in these books, talks a lot about taking writing seriously and about, creative energy. And if you disperse your energy on a million different things, you won't have the energy to write. I think one of the phrases in her book is save the sparkle for the page. That you can go out to parties and be really fun and have conversations and be really charming, but what's left for the page? And so a big part of my process of writing the novel, besides the actual structuring, which I can talk about too, but was gathering the nerve and the energy and the stamina for the long process of writing a novel. And I cannot say how important these books were for me. So what I did was I contacted Heather at a certain point, midway through writing the book, and I said, do you happen to do any kind of private, just chat with me sessions? And she did. And then I started, she looked at, she read things and helped in that way. Basically what I did was once I had the story of the main character and the guy who I've talked about, liking him. I realized the time period, which was very helpful, which I need to do for my new novel, what the time period was gonna be for the book, that it was gonna be 3 months of the summer. And then I took the 3 stories. I had Nina and her and him, the guy, and then I had Nina and her mother, that story, and then I gave her a friend, so that became kind of the 3rd story, and then I started alternating between those 3. And so I started sort of tracking. I think I basically went chapter by chapter with him, her mother, the girl, him, her mother, the girl. I think that was how it kind of wound up, and then each story grew. But that was, and then they all coalesced at the end. But yeah, that was the process of writing. But really, I cannot stress enough how wonderful Heather was in this process, because I owe her everything. It made such a big difference to her presence and her support and insights and brilliance in terms of just talking with her. And
That's so kind, Cynthia.
It's
Thank
true.
you. That's
It's
so
true.
generous and
Yes.
so kind. Cynthia came fully formed. She is an exquisite writer on the sentence level. You make each sentence as a little jewel that you've just crafted and honed, and my metaphor is breaking down rapidly. Can you talk a little bit about your process? Because you are a sentence level writer, but you also have come to grips with structure. Can you talk a little bit about how you work?
I very luckily love organizing. Last night I was in my hotel where I'm staying, and I brought all this jewelry, and it was all like in different places. And I sat there, I laid it all out on the bed and organized it by category. And I said to my boyfriend, "You'll never see me this happy." I just love organizing. And a novel is a lot of organization, as I'm sure a memoir is, like as I'm sure all writing is. Like, it's a lot of charting and a lot of physical charting of what comes where, excuse me, and okay, I've said this about this character, I brought this in, I had tons of calendars, even the days I was not mentioning in the book, I had to know. Oh God, it took forever, I have to say, it's part of why it took so long. What did this character do on this day? So even if we didn't see them for a week, what were they doing during this week? How have they changed during this week? So it was a lot of charting and a lot of as I said, structuring and organizing and calendars and index cards on the wall. And Heather likes the yarn technique, which is a little less of my technique, where you take a piece of yarn for each character, and it's like Homeland, you know, where you put them up on a bulletin board and pin them all around. That I like to do it on the computer, so I have like every app you can imagine for organizing and for calendars and for note taking and all that. And you know, each character had a color, and oh boy, it was a lot. So that, you know, that structure, and at the same time, writing the actual passages. I happen to really like forming sentences. You know, I enjoy that. It's just. I like words, I like language, I like putting words on the page, so that part of it was kind of more fun. The structuring was hard, I have to say. It's as much fun as it is. It's also, you know, because you never know, is this the right day to highlight? Is this the right scene to highlight? You know, I had a lot of things that I had to throw away, scenes that just, you know, didn't make sense, didn't work, didn't have life to them, didn't add anything new to the, you know, who the characters were. But the sentences, many of which I had to get rid of also, but were more fun to write, because finding the right word, to me, is the most fun of writing. Yeah.
So that's fascinating. I know you worked on this for 10 years?
100 years? Yeah, no, 10 years.
100 years?
100 years.
And you mentioned working on a new novel.
Yes.
What would you say you learned, if you can summarize it, from the first project that you're taking to the next one? Or is it true, Cynthia, like a lot of writers say, each book you're just starting completely over? It's like you know nothing.
I think I know a little bit more. It is starting over, because it's a new story, and it's telling a new story, and it's figuring out where to start and where to end and what the time period is and how much time and all of that. But I think there's a little bit more about, I think before, when I was writing this, a lot of times I just would have a scene and I was like, I think it's interesting, but I sort of didn't care what the reader felt or not. And I think I feel a little bit more attuned to not just writing for a reader, but a little bit, as I was saying, like, what does this contribute to the piece, and would I turn the page? You know, would I be interested enough to want to know what happens next, and what questions am I asking? And so I feel I'm a little bit more conscious of that, but it's still, you know, it's a slog. It's hard. It's a lot of. I feel like there's just. I read a wonderful thing the other day from Elif Baughman, I think is her name, who wrote The Idiot. And she said something about, you know, the book is fully formed, you just have to uncover it. Like, it's fully formed in the world, in the atmosphere, and you just have to uncover it. And she also said, the book is fond of you, and it wants to be uncovered, or something like that. And I love that. But you still have to do the uncovering. And even if the book exists, which I love that idea, it's still a lot of work just to find out what is it about. Yeah.
And where is this place that it exists? Where is it? I want the address.
And to not repeat everything. And to not be repetitive, and to not, you know, if there's a mother, is the mother going to be different enough? And yeah, that too. So.
One of the things I love in A Gorgeous Excitement is the friendship story. I love Stephanie. I love girl friendships as a subject matter. I just think that's so beautiful. And I also love the grandparents. And I feel like we don't see grandparents as much in literature as they exist in our lives. Would you read us an excerpt of the book? And then we'll take questions.
Okay.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Sure, thank you. Yes, I brought an excerpt that, or I'm going to read an excerpt that one of the things that happens in the novel is that Nina's mother, who has been depressed for a number of years, her mother, Nina's grandmother, has recently died, and the mother has therefore plunged into worse of a depression than usual, and basically what happens is they give her a new medication that sends her into mania. But so the grandmother has died, the grandfather is still alive, but he's now kind of going into, dementia, and forgets that his wife has died. So you'll see a few times he says, "Where's Pearl?" which is his wife, and they've all decided to not tell him because they don't want him to keep re-experiencing her death over and over. So they just say, "Oh, she's gone somewhere." And at the same time, Nina has, during this summer, the start of the summer, Nina meets a girl in Central Park who's also from outside of the city and who introduces her to cocaine, which you'll also see in this scene. I just ruined the whole surprise, but whatever. Anyway, okay, so and this girl works at a store on like 74th and 3rd, which is like a home goods, like a fancy home goods store. For anyone who's been to the city, it was Gracious Home, was what it was. Actually, it's still there. Gracious Home.
Still there.
Yeah. But I called it Maison Rouge. I don't know why I changed the name. Excuse me, I don't know why I'm so hoarse, but okay. So Seymour is Nina's grandfather's name, and Stephanie is the name of the girl at the store. So they've just gotten to the store. Nina tugged Seymour's hand to steer him around a corner, but the space was tight, and her elbow knocked a crystal owl off a shelf. It shattered against the hard floor. Great, she thought. 2 minutes, and I've already wrecked her store. A sales girl appeared beside them with a broom and a dustpan and promptly swept up the pieces of broken owl. "Nina, it's you, I can't believe it." Stephanie hugged her, accidentally smacking the back of her head with the broom handle. "I was hoping you'd come." They stood there smiling at each other. Until that moment, Nina hadn't realized she brought her grandfather here as a kind of prop, so she'd feel less exposed if Stephanie wasn't glad to see her. Now she squeezed his hand to communicate an apology. Then she pointed to the dustpan in Stephanie's hand and apologized to her too. "I make a mess wherever I go. Can I pay for it?" "Oh, please, with all this breakable stuff, you'd think they'd carpet the place." She smiled at Seymour, who was looking off into the distance, then stepped into his field of vision to include him in the conversation. "Who's this handsome gentleman?" she said. Nina introduced them. "Hello, Seymour," Stephanie said cheerfully. "You have a very smart and special granddaughter." "What can I tell you?" "Nothing I don't already know." She was more hyper than Nina remembered, tapping her tongue against the roof of her mouth, her fingers against her legs. After dumping the broken glass into a bin in the corner, she led them on a tour of the store, pointing in various directions. "Those lamps are made of agate from a beach in California. This obelisk is malachite. Russian czars would panel the walls of their castles with it. It's supposed to protect against the evil eye." She was talking too fast for Nina to absorb most of it, but her delight in the details gave everything a glow. Down another aisle for disquisitions on Art Deco decanters and Guadalajaran vases. Finally, Nina had to stop her. "This place is a workout," she joked, although actually Seymour was struggling to catch his breath. She was meant to take him for a walk, not run him into the ground. "I think he could use a break." Stephanie studied Nina for a second. "Follow me, just a tiny bit farther, I swear." They walked to the rear of the shop where they came to a door with a sign that said employees only. By the door was a scruffy armchair, and beside it a boxy black leather recliner with a rip down its side that Nina guessed was awaiting repairs. Stephanie asked Seymour if he wanted to take a load off. Nina couldn't imagine how he knew what she meant, but he went straight for the recliner. "You look like Captain Kirk," Stephanie said. "Can I borrow your granddaughter for a minute? I want to take her to the stockroom and show her the new waffle irons we just got in." Nina didn't really like waffles, the way the syrup got stuck in the craters, but Stephanie looked so eager. "Where's Pearl?" Seymour said. "She'll be here in a few minutes," Nina told him. "Don't go anywhere or she won't be able to find us." "Ugh," he said, and waved her off. She followed Stephanie through the door and down a dimly lit corridor to another closed door. Behind it was the stockroom, with floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with jars and bottles and boxes, stacks of throw pillows, dishes, and candlestick holders. In the middle of the room was a long steel table. "Want to get high?" Stephanie said. Nina laughed. Only she would fall for the waffle iron ruse. "I can't go back out there smelling like pot," she said. "Not that kind of high." Stephanie pulled out a small baggie filled with white powder. Nina had never seen cocaine in real life, but she recognized it from a term paper she wrote in 9th grade for a drug education class. She pored over glitzy photos of Studio 54, learned that Thomas Edison drank a cocaine-laced Bordeaux called Van Mariani to help him work through the night, and read Freud's description of a cocaine high, a gorgeous excitement. See? She'd also watched Scarface, mesmerized by Michelle Pfeiffer's crystal-handled Coke spoon. Was there ever a more glamorous accessory? "My friend Damien gave me an 8-ball for my birthday," Stephanie said. Was there ever a more glamorous sentence? She took out a credit card from her wallet and sliced the powder into lines. Nina saw that the card had Stephanie's name on it, not her mother's or father's, like the one Nina had to use. And even then, she often had to show a signed permission slip from her parents, as if she were 10 years old. Stephanie snorted one of the lines through a rolled-up dollar bill and handed it to Nina, who brought it to her nose. It smelled like ink and sweaty palms. She leaned down and sniffed a line, half a line, pausing to see how it went. A slight sting, but nothing dire. This is her first time doing it, by the way. I don't know if I made that clear. "If it hurts, I have Vaseline," Stephanie said. Nina shook her head. She sniffed the second half. Within seconds, her brain switched to its highest voltage ever, like one of Edison's light bulbs on overload. And she was hit hard by a wave of, "Yes, Dr. Freud," gorgeous excitement. "Hey, want to come to my July 4th party?" Stephanie asked. "There'll be a lot of guys there." She touched her finger to a trace of powder, then ran it over her gums. Nina did the same, feeling them go pleasantly numb. "I'll find someone for you," Stephanie said. "I'm a really good matchmaker." "Want to hear something funny?" Nina asked. "My grandfather's neighbors met in Auschwitz and used to say Hitler was their matchmaker." Yikes. Stephanie twisted the baggie closed. "Speaking of your grandfather, we should get back to him." It took Nina a second. "Holy shit, how long have we been in here?" She yanked open the door to the stockroom and rushed down the corridor. She threw open the door to the store. The black leather recliner was empty. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you so much for reading. I love this novel, and we would now love to take your questions. Any questions about the process or Cynthia's Bryn?
Yeah, I'm wondering, I know you wrote this book over the course of 10 years, so I'm sure you were reading a whole lot during that process, but I'm wondering if there are some titles that stand out to you as something you were reading at the time that wound up influencing you feel?
One of my favorite writers is Joyce Carol Oates. Oh, can you tell? Yeah, I love how she deals with violence, and I love how she deals with women and young women. I read Where Are You Going, Where You've Been? I mean, I've read that story a million times, but all of her work was very helpful. And then I got to meet her and give her a galley, which was really exciting, so that was really nice. I read a lot of, oh gosh, now of course I can't think of any, Mary Gateskill, a lot of writers who write about women. It was very helpful just to, one of the hard things, I was gonna say it's very helpful to be able to see how other writers showed a young woman's consciousness on the page. That took me a lot of drafts to get to. The character is very much based on me, so it was difficult sometimes to have her not just react to what was going on, to be kind of her own, to build her as her own person. So I think that those were a lot of the writers that I read. Laurie Moore, Mary Gateskill, Sue Miller, who wrote That Night, Alice McDermott. So those were a lot of women writers.
Yeah,
Honestly, were those who I read. And then I read a lot of suspense books. I love suspense novels and mystery novels. So I can't think of any off the top of my head, but those are helpful too for structure and for how to keep turning the page. Yeah.
Thank you.
Kira.
Hi, Kara.
Thank you so much for reading. That was lovely.
Oh, sure.
I was wondering, so you mentioned that you started kind of thinking about wanting to tell this story, and you tried it as a short story, and it took you a while to arrive at the novel, and then to arrive at how long of a time period it would cover, the 3 months in the summer. I was wondering how many different kind of iterations or ideas of forms that this took before you landed on that being the right form to tell the story, and how did you know that that was the right one? Like, how did you know, yes, 3 months summer is perfect? Great question.
That is a great question, and I wish I knew how I knew. But one of the things I decided writing this book was I was not going to have a lot of backstory, and I'm not really sure why I decided that, but I just somehow that was happening as I was writing, that I didn't have a lot of who Nina was when she was younger, or history of her, or stories about her, other family members, or it just kind of wound up that way. So the tight structure of 3 months seemed to fit, and it also was 3 acts, which made it a little bit easier. It almost felt like a play, but it was very much the present time of the story as opposed to a bigger, here's what happened years ago, or here's what's going to happen in the future. I think that that here's June, here's July, here's August just became a way of dealing with present time of the story as opposed to other years or things like that. I also knew I knew the murder itself had in real life, so I kept a lot of real life details, and then I changed a lot also, but I kept a lot of the same dates. And the real life murder did happen on August 26th, so that was the end of the summer, and I would remember that very vividly because in real life I went back to college right after that. I also wanted Nina to be in that summer between high school and college where things are very suspended and liminal, and you're leaving your past but you're not really in your future yet, so I did want it to be over the course of that summer. And then I also, just by total coincidence, I knew I wanted it to start in June. I wanted it to be the first Friday in June because that felt like the first kind of fun party night of a summer. And I went to the New York Public Library. A lot of newspapers back from that time are not online. So I went to the New York Public Library to look at the Daily News or the New York Post, and it turned out that there was another very famous case from that summer. There was a model, a young woman named Marla Hansen, some people might remember, whose face was slashed by her landlord right on June 4th, the night before. So June 5th in the newspapers was about that story. So, and a picture of her, and she had like scars all over, she had slashes all over her face, and she had to have like 100-something stitches. So it just by coincidence, the novel began with a story about violence toward a young woman, and then was going to end with that, and so that also felt like the right time frame. So I feel like looking up, even if you're not telling the exact true story, looking up events that happened during the time period that you want to talk about can really, turns out, give an idea for the structure that you may not have even known, or for the theme, or for the atmosphere. So, yeah.
That's a great tip. Thank
Oh,
you so
good,
much.
sure.
Other questions? Britt.
I wonder what advice, I mean, we talk a lot about how women are represented in the media, and I feel like so much of your work is about women and female friendships, etc. So I'm wondering what advice you would give to women writers that is specific to women writers, different from just the general writer.
Great question.
That's really good. That's a really good question. I mean, some of the advice I would give, honestly, is these books. But really, I mean, advice of, I know that, I happen to not have children, but I know that women feel a lot of responsibility to the outside world, to a job, to children, to other family members, to taking care of, parents, to being social, to holding events, to making other people feel comfortable and happy and welcome in their life. So I feel like, and it's hard to not do a lot of that, but again, I feel like if you're gonna write and the time it takes to write, to really write and really concentrate and to make that a main part of your life, that you do have to say no, and you do have to save the sparkle for the page sometimes, and do have to feel not the most popular and not the most well-liked. I notice this in myself. I want to go to every reading, and I want to go to every party, and I want to go to all the events that go on, and it's really fun, and I want to have tons of friends, and I want to go to all the dinner parties, all those things. I don't know if this is only for women, but at least for me as a woman, to feel liked and to feel part of the world, and not to say you can't have any fun when you're writing a book, but I remember hearing years ago, now of course this is a male author who said this, it was Gordon Lish, said, what are you willing to sacrifice? And, to think about what are you able to sacrifice? What are you willing to sacrifice if you really want to write? And I think particularly for women that can be difficult, to not be the one who's seen as the supportive, good friend, or good daughter, or good mother. Wow, that feels really serious to say, but yeah, I think that is a lot of it, of are you going to not be that person so that you can have this, achievement or whatever that you've always wanted. I know so many people and women who are teachers and women who are in the arts, and they organize literary festivals, and I know a woman who is desperate to write her memoir, and so much comes in front of it, which takes the whole day, and that's it. And then it's been years, so I think that would be my advice.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question about, you're discussing early on about the form of a sentence and how you pay so close attention to every word in crafting that sentence. To me, that sounds like writing poetry. So can either or both of you talk about whether or not your writing has been influenced by reading poets?
Yes, absolutely. I'll jump in. I teach poetry, and I've been writing poetry all along, and I don't distinguish between the genres. I think you're handpicking every single word, no matter what you're writing. Cynthia's got a great ear. She pays a lot of attention to the rhythm of the sentence, and she's placing each word just truly like a mosaic, like placing these little jeweled bits. She cares so much. She will revise a sentence 16,000 times, and you like it. You love doing that. I don't have that same level of patience, but for me, the sound work, listening to the sounds of the words, making sure they go together, and I love interior design. And so I think of it as like, it all has to go together. Like there has to be this sonic landscape that suits the energy and the feeling in the piece too. So I don't distinguish the poetry toolkit from the prose toolkit. To me, it's just writing. And I know you feel similar.
I read tons of poetry.
Yeah,
and one of the reasons I read so much, the place where I teach in New York called the Writer's Studio, we give exercises to students. We give a page of text, whether it's a poem or an excerpt from a story or a novel, and the students each week try out different narrators from the poem, first person, third person, lyric, funny, loud, whatever it may be, and they try out the narrator each week. And I was, trained that way. Also, I was a student in the school before I was a teacher there, so I was exposed from my early 20s to, and even before, but particularly then, to reading classic contemporary poetry. I love poetry. Some of my best friends are poets, but they are actually. I mean, and my mentor in New York City, Philip Schultz, is a wonderful Pulitzer Prize winning poet, and he's exposed me to so much poetry. And I didn't think of it, but I read a lot of poetry before I start writing. Like for any I love Tony Hoagland, and I read just best American poetry, and I love poetry. And Kaveh Akbar is another poet I love. Ross Gay, who I heard was here recently. Yeah, so I'm mentioning all male poets. I can't believe I'm doing that. I love Ellen Bass. There's so many women poets too. So anyway, yes, I read tons of poetry. I like to watch poets on YouTube read their poems. I really enjoy that before I start writing. So yeah, I love poetry, and and love hearing it read and reading it. Yeah.
So how did you decide on the title? I mean, because the book, I haven't finished the book, I only got a little bit into it, but, you know, the storylines about, you know, women being attacked and this guy and stuff. Why would you, how did you decide on the title then to be about the cocaine incident versus the women situation?
I had a different title first, and that was a little bit more in that vein. It was called It's Supposed to Hurt, a title that I personally loved. I was then told that that was not a great title, because what I meant was it's supposed to hurt like life hurts, like you can't get through life without being hurt. But my friend said to me, if you could explain that to everybody who had the book in front of them, it might make more sense. So when I first spoke to my agent, honestly, part of it was I have to say, was a publishing decision. She said to me, do you have a different title? And my boyfriend, who's here, had liked the title of Gorgeous Excitement, and I mentioned that to her. She liked it, and I know what you're saying, but I think it does apply to the whole book. I like how the two words are kind of weird and jangly together. They kind of don't make sense. They sort of rub against each other. It's just a weird combination. I like that the quote comes from Freud, which I mentioned at the start of the book. Much of the book is about psychiatry and about, again, the mother's manic episode. It is about cocaine and about the euphoria and the recklessness, and how euphoria is really so much about recklessness, and how it's about blindness, and the book is so much about what you think you want turning out to be the opposite of what you want, and about what you think is courage and freedom. Nina looks at these characters and thinks they're so free and courageous, but it's really about self-destructiveness. So I hope as you read the book that the title will feel that it covers. In the end, I felt that it covered the whole kind of theme of those themes in the novel.
Any more questions before we go to our signing?
Oh, what's your next book you're working
on? I'm working on another book that happens to be about a murder. I did not even mean to do that, but it's about, I'll just say very vaguely, about a young man who murders people in an alcoholic blackout and doesn't remember for many years. Again, based on a true story. So in real life, he got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous and started to dream about the crime and remember it. And I was just very interested in that idea of, it's about a lot of other things, but about what if you did something and forgot it? You know, what if you had a secret that you didn't even remember? It just really, that case took place in the 90s, and I remember it also, and so it just struck me as something I've always had in mind. So that's at the moment the book is called Blackout. I have no idea, we'll see 10 years from now if that's still the same title, but hopefully it won't take as long. But yeah, that's what I'm working on now.
Any other questions?
Thank you for asking.
We hope to see you back here for the next one.
Thank you, I would love to be. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, and just a